Hey class, here is our reading for chapter 7, The Toil of Trace and Trail, going along with our novel study, The Call of the Wild. If you watched the previous video that's on here or on YouTube that is detailing chapter 7's vocab words, you also saw chapter 7's disclaimer. But just real quick, let me remind you of that disclaimer. So I did not cut any parts of chapter 7 out, but there are a few scenes, not super detailed and super gory, where I needed to take it out, but they do talk about the dogs being whipped a few times. A few of our dogs die, and so we'll talk about that and how, and which is more natural causes. And then there is a fight between two men at the end of this chapter. So just keep all those things in mind. Kick back and follow along as we read chapter 7, The Toil of Trace and Trail. The Scotsman and his team arrived at Skagway. It had been 30 days. The dogs were in bad shape. A few were limping. Buck had lost 25 pounds. The men thought they would have a long rest, but there were piles of mail to deliver. They received new orders. They had to sell the dogs and buy fresh ones. Two men from the States came by. Charles and Hal seemed out of place in the Northland. Buck saw money change hands. He knew he would never see the Scotsman again. His new owners took the team to their camp. A woman was there. Her name was Mercedes. She was Charles's wife and Hal's sister. The three packed up their stuff. Others watched. They laughed as they loaded their sled. Some tried to help, but the three wouldn't take advice. The sled was heavy. That is a heavy load. Do you think the dogs can run all day with that? One man asked. Sure, said Hal. He took hold of the sled. He swung the whip. Mush, he shouted. The dogs tried to move forward, but the sled didn't move. Lazy dogs, Hal shouted. I'll show them. He lashed them with the whip. Don't hurt them, Mercedes cried. You don't know anything about dogs, her brother said. You've got to whip them to get them going. Ask that man over there. Those dogs are weak. They need rest, the man said. Never mind him, Mercedes said to Hal. Do what you think is best. Hal whipped the dogs again, but the sled did not move. Mercedes dropped to her knees. She put her arms around Buck's neck. You poor things, she cried. Why don't you pull harder? Then you won't have to be whipped. The dogs inched forward. They swung around a bend. The sled tipped over. Half the load spilled. Buck pushed himself. The dogs were told to stop, but they didn't listen. They dashed ahead. The rest of the load scattered all over the street. Kind people helped pick up the mess. They gave them advice. twice the dogs, and half the load. Hal and Charles went through their things. They got rid of a lot. Mercedes cried over each thing that was thrown out. They bought 6 more dogs. The team now had 14 dogs. But the new dogs didn't know anything. Buck taught them the best he could. They did not like being sled dogs. Hal and Charles were very proud. They had never seen a sled with 14 dogs. Of course, there was a reason for this. The 14 dogs would eat a lot of food. One sled could not carry enough. The 2 men did not know this. Buck didn't like these people. They didn't know how to do anything, and they didn't want to learn. They didn't know how to work the dogs. They didn't know what it meant to work at all. One day, Hal noticed his dog food was half gone. They had only covered 1/4 of their route. He gave the dogs less food. He tried to increase the day's travel. The dogs needed rest. They were weak. Dub was the first to go. He was very weak and in pain. Hal shot Dub with the big gun. Then 6 other dogs died one by one. They were not getting enough food to eat. Buck was unsteady. He pulled when he could. He fell a lot. Buck and the others looked like bags of bones. Soon 2 more were gone. Only 5 remained: Joe, Pike, Solex, Teak, and Buck. It was beautiful spring weather. The sun was shining. Everything was thawing. Neither the people nor the dogs enjoyed it. The group came to John Thornton's camp. They were at the mouth of the White River. The dogs dropped. They looked as if they were all dead. Hal bragged about their luck. The ice was melting, but they had made it all the way to White River. John Thornton spoke up. Only fools could have made it. The bottom is likely to drop out at any moment. I wouldn't risk my life on that ice, not for all the gold in Alaska. We're going to Dawson, Hal said, and he raised his whip. Get up, Buck. Mush on. The team did not get up. Hal kept using the whip. One by one, the dogs crawled to their feet, but Buck did not move. Hal exchanged his whip for the club, but Buck still refused to move. He had made up his mind. He would not get up. He had felt the thin ice under his feet. He seemed to sense disaster ahead. Suddenly, John Thornton cried out. He jumped on Hal. Mercedes screamed. Charles just watched. John Thornton stood over Buck. If you hit that dog again, I'll kill you, he said. It's my dog, Hal said. Get out of my way. I'm going to Dawson. John Thornton stood between Hal and Buck. Hal drew a knife, and John Thornton hit Hal's hand with an axe handle. The knife fell to the ground. Thornton picked up the knife, and he cut Buck's straps. Hal gave in. A few minutes later, the sled pulled away. Buck raised his head to watch. John Thornton searched Buck's body for broken bones. He found only bruises. They watched the sled crawling along the ice, and just then the sled's back end dropped down. A whole section of ice gave way, and the dogs and humans disappeared. They went into the freezing river. The trail made of ice was gone. You poor devil, said John Thornton. Buck licked his hand. The end. All right. Feel free to read this chapter over and over again. And if you've already watched the video for this week, just detailing what we're working on, then you should know that on Thursday, you're going to do your 10 questions. And in that video, I will have read them for you. So you can go ahead and get those done as soon as you've read this enough times that you feel comfortable with the content. All right. Bye, class.